Hey guys, and welcome to the first in a series of tutorials based on digitally modifying cars. This is a basic introduction as to what digitally modifying cars is, a basic analysis of the interface within Adobe Photoshop, which is the software we're going to be using to do this. I'm currently running Adobe Photoshop CS4 64-bit on Windows 7. Okay, so what is digitally modifying cars? Okay, well, it's basically taking images of cars or any other vehicles. You can apply these skills to any other vehicles, machinery, or even people. It doesn't matter. Your imagination is the only thing that limits you within this type of skill. Okay, so this is an image here of a car which I downloaded off Google Images. Apologies for my phone. And what I do advise beginners, okay, is to use images like this, which are high resolution, but don't have a lot of action going on in the background, so it's quite plain. And the reason for this is when you're beginning, it might be a bit confusing to understand selections, masking, and the way that Photoshop operates with colored pixels, okay. So I do advise try and get images like this to begin with. And once you get good and hone your skills on images like this, move on to the pictures with a bit more action and detail that's going on around. Okay, so just a quick example as to the basic things that we can do within Photoshop. Okay, here is the original image which I downloaded. Okay, and then this is me editing it within Photoshop. I've obviously changed the color to green. I've cleared the indicators, shined the alloys a bit, and of course chopped the roof off to give it this convertible look. And I've also removed the spoiler. Just one of the many things we can do within Photoshop to manipulate these images. The next one, I was just playing around with different textures within Photoshop, and we've got this like marble sort of swirling paint effect that I've put on. Looks a bit strange. I didn't really play around with the contrast, the lightness and brightness of the picture, but it was just a quick render just to give you examples as to what we can expect to be doing. The next picture here is kind of like a pearlescent type style paint that we've added with a nice little fleck in the paint itself. This is a technique I only managed to stumble across a couple of days ago when I was messing around with some of the rendering options within Photoshop, and this appeared and I thought that actually looks pretty cool. So you know, I still need to perfect it and play around with it, and hopefully by the paint tutorial I'll be able to you know, give you some advice and some more insight on the actual paint effects that we can use with this fleck. Okay, so now the skills that you're going to be using, okay, now I know it's a bit random, she's not a car, she is an actress, okay, you can actually apply it to real life images, okay. A lot of the techniques we'll use, you can use across a wide variety of different works, from, you know, obviously digitally modifying cars, modifying other vehicles, you know, touching up pictures, touching up images of landscapes, etc. So just to give you an example, this is another image I downloaded off Google, and using the techniques which we'll be learning in these tutorials, I've managed to create this kind of you know, good and evil side of Angelina Jolie, using, like I said, the techniques that we'll be learning within these tutorials. So, you know, using textures as for the skin, and as you can see, I've done a bit of you know, burning and dodging to lighten and darken areas, desaturating some of the image, the luminosity changing within the hair. So we will be learning this kind of thing, and like I said, these skills you can use for whatever. It's only your imagination that limits you, and once you become comfortable with Photoshop, you will find yourself, you know, not being able to tear yourself away from the computer, because you'll just download a random image of Google, and you'll just be manipulating it, trying to do the weirdest things, and you know, it's pretty good fun to do. Right, so let's get into Photoshop itself. Now, for people who know Photoshop or advanced users, you might want to skip this part, okay, because it is a sort of like a basic insight into Photoshop itself. Now, for you beginners, the first thing you want to do within Photoshop is go to Edit and Preferences, and then General. Okay, now with Photoshop, it does use obviously a lot of RAM, a lot of processor power, but what you want to do when you are working with this type of thing, there's going to be sometimes a lot of colors and a lot of information on the screen, so you want Photoshop to be able to run at a suitable pace to obviously keep up with what you're doing. What I want to turn your attention to mainly in this section is the performance section, and here we have the amount of RAM that we let Photoshop use when it's in operation. You want to give it as much as you can afford to give it. here it says the ideal range that Photoshop operates at. So if you can get a number between that range, obviously depending on what other programs you run and how you know, the spec of your PC, just do the best you can, and it will obviously make Photoshop run a bit smoother and quicker. The history states here you want to set to as high as possible, okay, obviously without compromising performance. The higher you can set it basically means the more amount of times you can go back in history to recorrect your work. If you've done something that you don't like, you can go back and delete that. If you, for example, if you've only got 2 history states and you've painted something on an image, then you've desaturated it, and then you've changed the hue, and you actually think, well, actually I don't want to paint that, you can only go back 2 steps to the desaturation, so you won't be able to remove the paint effect. So obviously going back in history is quite important, so set it as high as you can. Right, so let me just open a file here, okay, the Lamborghini original file. Now, what is actual photo manipulation? Okay, with digitally modifying cars, we basically take parts of other cars and images and add them to our picture that we want to modify. So as a quick example, okay, I'm going to open this picture of a really ugly Carrera GT, okay, and I'm going to nick the wheel from this image. Now don't worry how I'm doing this, guys, because I'm going to teach you these in the tutorial specifically for these items, okay. So what you do is you take parts of different images and we're going to manipulate them within Photoshop to actually fit what we're trying to do. Okay, and as you can see here, we're going to mess around with this alloy and try and add it to this car here. And it's not going to be perfect, like I said, because we're rushing the selection, but when we do the section on wheels, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll talk you through step by step. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing, is taking parts of other cars, manipulating with it within Photoshop and adding it to our image. Now this is not only for wheels, this is obviously going to be for spoilers, body kits, graphics, you know, everything you can think of that involves modifying cars. It's going to be all used from donor images, edited, and then put into our picture. So as you can see, that's nowhere near perfect, but obviously it's just an example to show you how it actually works. Right, here we have your layers palette within Photoshop, probably the most important area of Photoshop. Okay, this allows you to work in a structured system which allows you to edit, manipulate different items of your picture on its own, so you won't actually mess up all the pictures. So for example, if we only worked in one layer on the background and we sort of done something to the car that we didn't like, we would have to start again because we wouldn't be able to remove it unless obviously we use the history. But this way, as you can see, we've got layer 1 and 2, and that represents both the wheels. So if I turned around and said I didn't like, you know, the rear wheel, I can just delete that layer and we haven't affected the picture underneath. I'm not going to talk too much about layers because I can make a whole video on layers specifically, but I will obviously talk you guys through what I'm doing in this section through the next tutorials. Right, so that about wraps it up for our introduction. One word of advice, guys: if you can try and pick up the hotkeys, the shortcuts in Photoshop, it's just going to make your workflow much quicker, and it's going to flow nicer, and it's going to be easier for you to navigate around. Obviously, as I'm teaching you guys in the tutorials, I'm going to be calling out the hotkeys that I use, and obviously, you know, hopefully that will get you used to using them, and you'll see it will speed up your flow in Photoshop. So as an introduction, guys, that's basically what we're going to be doing in this series of tutorials. I'm going to take you through how to modify a car digitally from, you know, the basics as paint, changing the color of the car, you know, textures, graphics, alloy wheels, tires, brakes, calipers, lights, tinting windows, removing spoilers, adding body kits, removing body kits, you know, changing your background, making it look like the car's moving, changing from day to night, adding smoke to your wheels like it's having a burnout. You know, we're going to cover all these things, guys, so stay tuned for the upcoming tutorials. Please drop comments, any questions, please email me. I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you have a tutorial that you would like to learn, but you're obviously not sure how to do it, just drop me a message. I'll try and create a tutorial for you, because sometimes I do have a bit of spare time, so I'll post that up especially for you guys. So that wraps it up for the intro, guys. I appreciate you watching this, and hope to see you on the next tutorial, which will be paint. Okay, so thanks for your time, and I'll see you then.